Grandma, quick! We have to hide. They want to take you to the old people place, my 7-year-old granddaughter whispered, tugging at my sleeve. I walked out of the house like a ghost, no destination. What they didn't know was that I was hiding an $18.7 million fortune. My revenge was swift and brutal. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're here to listen. Stay here with me through this whole story and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my stories travel. I didn't say a word to her. I couldn't. My legs were already moving, my coat only half on, purse clutched tight in one hand. I stepped off the porch and down the concrete path, passing the rose bushes I'd trimmed just last week. The sun was still low, casting long shadows across the yard. A neighbor waved from across the street. I smiled faintly, though I doubt it reached my eyes. They'd planned it for today. I knew now. Harla wasn't the kind of child to make something up not like that. She'd overheard something, probably whispered late at night when they thought she was asleep. That's when they made their moves, Kurt and Dina. Behind closed doors, always pretending everything was fine in front of me. All fake smiles and thank you, Mom, while they quietly plotted to remove me from my own life. I reached the corner of the block before I realized I had no idea where I was going. My shoes weren't made for long walks. The leather pinched at my toes, and I'd left my reading glasses on the kitchen table. Still, I kept walking. I wouldn't be there when they came back with their fake concern and rehearsed lines about safety and care and how they just wanted what was best for me. No, what they wanted was my house. I'd seen the tax documents Kurt left out last month, casually placed like he wanted me to notice. He hadn't said a word about them, just let me accidentally see the valuation. Nearly $500,000 now, thanks to the development in the area. They'd tried to plant the seed gently. Wouldn't it be nice to live somewhere with more company? Somewhere with support? That's how they said it. With support. As if I couldn't still bake a cake from scratch, walk to the pharmacy, or fix a leaky faucet. But now the charade was over. Harla's voice echoed in my ears. They want to take you to the old people place. Not even a name, just the place. Like I was already half gone. I'd never forget the look in her eyes when she said it. Scared, wide-eyed, like she was the one being sent away. That little girl was the only reason I tolerated their behavior this long. The only person in that house who still looked at me like I mattered. I turned onto Maple Street, heading toward downtown. Somewhere, a bus rumbled in the distance. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't disposable. They thought they knew me. The quiet old woman who knitted on the porch and sent birthday cards with $10 bills inside. But what Kurt and Dina didn't know, couldn't even begin to guess, was that I'd been preparing for this day for years. I boarded the city bus without checking the route. The driver, a heavy-set man with a graying beard, gave me a tired smile as I dropped a crumpled bill into the fare slot. I took a seat by the window, second row from the back, clutching my purse to my chest like a life raft. The streets of Millhaven drifted by, familiar shop fronts, bakery windows steaming up from fresh loaves, a teenager walking a golden retriever. All of it felt so normal, so intact while I was splintering apart inside. They really meant to do it. Not just talk, not just hint. They were actually going to take me somewhere and leave me there. Like a box to be donated. As if I hadn't spent 29 years of my life building that house, raising Kurt inside it, nursing his fevers and reading his books and staying up late when he didn't come home on time. And now that I was 67 and a little slower getting up the stairs, they were ready to haul me off like expired furniture. I closed my eyes and let the bus rock me while my mind wandered backward. 5 years ago, when Peter died, they swarmed me with casseroles and platitudes. Kurt had held my hand at the funeral like he was still my boy. Dina was already different back then, polite but cold, like she'd memorized the steps to the grief dance but didn't want to be there. After the service, she stood on my porch and asked if I planned to keep the house. I said yes. She didn't smile. That was the first crack. Over time, they pulled back. Kurt stopped calling unless it was about Harla. Holidays became shorter. Dinners always ended with Dina glancing at her phone, tapping her polished fingernail against the screen, while Kurt pretended not to notice. They stopped asking if I needed help with errands. They started showing up late to birthdays. Harla was the only one who never changed. What they didn't know, what no one in that family knew, was that I never needed their help. Not for bills, not for groceries, not for anything, because Peter had made sure of that long before he passed. After his diagnosis, Peter sat me down with his old green ledger and told me the truth. I remember the way he cleared his throat 3 times before he spoke. The man couldn't fix a broken washing machine, but he had spent decades building a secret. He'd invented a series of climate sensors and control units that he quietly licensed to agricultural suppliers. Nothing fancy, just water-saving sensors and low-tech irrigation timers, but the patents paid dividends. And every penny he tucked away in safe investments and modest accounts that only I had access to. We decided together not to tell Kurt. Peter's logic was sound. Let the boy build his own life. Let's see who he becomes without thinking there's a net under him. I agreed. At the time, I believed that wisdom would grow in Kurt the way it had in his father, slowly, surely, one decision at a time. And in the beginning, it seemed to be working. He got his degree in civil engineering, landed a solid job, married Dina. But then I started noticing things. How easily influenced he was by her sharp opinions, how he let her steer decisions, even when it came to Harla, how he dismissed me with subtle smiles that didn't reach his eyes. He'd become malleable, folded into her ambition. And she saw me as an obstacle, a dead weight, one final speed bump on their path to financial freedom. They assumed I was broke because I let them think it. I never bought new clothes. I clipped coupons. I drove a 14-year-old sedan with a cracked rear light. I even made up a story about living off Peter's modest pension so they wouldn't suspect. It was a disguise, my camouflage. But just because I wore threadbare cardigans didn't mean I didn't have claws. The bus rolled past a strip mall and I caught my reflection in the window. Wrinkled, yes. Weathered, maybe, but not weak. I pressed my fingers to the worn leather strap of my purse, feeling for the edge of the envelope tucked inside, the one with the bank slips, the P.O. box key, and the contact card for our attorney. The mask had served its purpose. It was time to take it off. 6 months passed. Autumn melted into winter, and winter gave way to the soft budding of spring. Life settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I was missing. Early mornings with tea on the porch, afternoons spent pulling weeds or walking to the post office, and evenings with Harla reading next to me on the couch, her legs tangled in a fleece blanket and her head resting on my shoulder. She came over almost every day now, sometimes with a new book to share, sometimes just to sit in silence, and I let her. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can give a child is space where they don't have to earn love. Kurt was different too. The change wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was slow, like snow melting off a roof. He still fumbled, still said the wrong things sometimes, but he showed up. He started picking Harla up from school, cooking on weekends, sitting on the floor during our little garden club meetings and asking her what she was learning from Grandma's dirt-covered hands. One day, he helped me fix the broken screen door. He didn't ask for praise. He just did it, like his father used to. Dina changed in smaller, quieter ways. She stopped wearing her armor, the designer clothes, the clipped tone, the constant need to control the narrative. Sometimes she waved when she saw me through the kitchen window. Once, she even sent over a batch of muffins that didn't come from a box. They were terrible, but I ate one anyway. The war was over, not forgotten, not forgiven, but behind me. Peter's notebook stayed on my nightstand. Every so often, I flipped to the page with his final message, rereading the line I'd memorized by now. You'll know when it's time to tell the truth. I had, and in doing so, I'd rewritten not just my own story, but the entire arc of our family's legacy. It would no longer be the tale of a son who turned cold or a daughter-in-law who tried to erase me. It would be the story of a woman who refused to be discarded, a grandmother who used her strength, her foresight, and her hidden fortune not for revenge, but for justice, for protection, for renewal. Harla once asked me if I missed Peter. Every day, I told her, but I think he'd be proud of us. She'd smiled and squeezed my hand. He would. You're the strongest person I know. I didn't correct her because strength doesn't always look like power or wealth or fury. Sometimes it looks like staying, like surviving, like standing firm when everything inside you wants to disappear. Sometimes it looks like planting marigolds in spring. One warm evening, Harla and I sat side by side on the porch, watching the neighborhood children ride their bikes in loops. "Grandma," she said quietly, "will you always live next door?" I smiled and took her hand. "As long as you need me to." She nodded like she was filing that away somewhere secret and sacred. I watched the sun slip behind the rooftops and thought about everything that had been stolen, nearly stolen, and reclaimed. About the woman I used to be, the woman I almost became, and the one I chose instead. Marie Calloway, widow, grandmother, architect of quiet revolutions. I wasn't just home, I was the home. The bank lobby was quiet when I walked in, clean, clinical, and full of gentle muzak designed to lower your blood pressure. I approached the reception desk, nodding at the young man in a vest and badge who looked barely old enough to drive. His smile faltered when I told him my name. "I need to access my safety deposit box," I said. He tapped a few keys, glanced at the screen, and his eyebrows lifted just a fraction, just enough for me to notice. "Of course, Ms. Calloway. One moment, please." He stood a little straighter. A few minutes later, I was being led through two sets of locked doors and into the small private room where they brought out the metal box, long and narrow like a tomb. The bank manager, Mr. Jensen, stayed respectfully silent as he placed it on the table and stepped out to give me privacy. I waited until the door clicked shut behind him before opening the lid. Inside were the artifacts of a life my family never knew existed. Crisp legal documents, a few velvet pouches of gold coins Peter had insisted on buying, just in case, 3 blue notebooks with his meticulous handwriting, and under everything else wrapped in a faded tea towel, the green leather ledger, the original one, the one he'd carried around for 30 years. I lifted it gently, like it might break. It smelled faintly of cedar and ink. Peter's handwriting was always neat, even when his hands began to shake. Each entry was carefully dated, labeled, and double-checked. He'd tracked every royalty check down to the cent, not just from the irrigation timers either. There were new additions, automated pet bowls, digital pill dispensers, some kind of adaptive thermostat for greenhouses. After Peter passed, the income hadn't slowed. If anything, it had grown. He'd set up renewals that continued to deposit quietly into our accounts each quarter. I flipped to the final pages. There it was, a total, a sum I still hadn't wrapped my head around completely. $18,762,000 and change. I had stared at that number so many times that the zeros had stopped meaning anything. What struck me wasn't the fortune itself. It was that Peter had built it alone, piece by piece, for us, for Kurt, for Harla, but not for Dina. Beneath the totals, he'd left me a letter, a single page, folded in thirds, addressed to my Marie. My hands shook as I opened it. My Marie, if you're reading this, it means you've opened the box, and that probably means I'm not around to argue about it anymore. I know you wanted to tell Kurt. I did too, once. But something told me to wait, to let him grow, to let him struggle just enough to find his strength. If he never gets there, if the boy I raised becomes someone who can be manipulated, or worse, who would discard his own mother, then this fortune must serve a different purpose. You'll know what to do. You always have. Protect Harla. Use what we built to teach her what matters. And for God's sake, don't let them take you quietly. Love, always. Peter. The tears came fast, silent, hot. I didn't sob. I wasn't even sure I breathed. I just sat there, hand over my mouth, absorbing the full weight of that message. He knew. Even 5 years ago, he must have seen something I didn't want to admit. I wiped my eyes with a tissue from my purse, refolded the letter, and placed it inside the notebook. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. The ledger, the patents, the accounts, they weren't secrets anymore. They were tools, weapons even, not for revenge in the petty sense, but for correction, for defense, for legacy. Harla was still a child, but she was bright, sensitive, the kind of child who noticed things, how I limped slightly on the stairs, how Dina's smiles never reached her eyes, how Kurt always changed the subject when I brought up Peter's name. She deserved better, better than a mother who used her for status, better than a father who stood by in silence, better than a life built on convenience. I repacked the box, leaving out the green notebook, and buzzed for Mr. Jensen. "Thank you," I said as he opened the door. "I'll be needing access again soon, but for now, I'm done." "Of course, Ms. Calloway. Just let us know." Outside, the wind had picked up. I held the notebook close under my coat as I walked toward the corner, my heels clicking sharply on the pavement. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't drifting. I was moving with intent. Peter had built the fortress. Now it was my turn to light the torches. I didn't go home that night. I checked into a quiet little motor inn by the river, the kind with floral bedspreads and a front desk clerk who didn't ask questions. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood. I drew the curtains, kicked off my shoes, and placed Peter's notebook on the desk like it was sacred. Then I opened my phone and called the only man I trusted with what had to come next. "James, it's Marie Calloway. I need to meet. Tomorrow morning. First thing." There was a pause. Then, in that same deep, even voice I remembered from all those years ago, "Of course." "My office, 9 a.m. Is everything all right?" "No," I said, "but it's going to be." James Moreland had handled Peter's estate filings when he passed, though we'd intentionally kept the real documents out of the probate court. The patents and investment accounts were never part of the public record. Peter insisted we keep them sealed until the time was right. I'd almost forgotten James was holding those documents in a sealed envelope marked private, only at Marie's request. The next morning, I sat across from him in a leather chair worn smooth with age. His office hadn't changed. The same mahogany shelves, the same framed Princeton degree, the same brass lamp casting warm light onto the neat row of manila folders lined up on his desk like obedient soldiers. "I want to update everything," I told him. "The will, the power of attorney. I want to build a trust for my granddaughter, Harla. Irrevocable, shielded." James didn't blink. He leaned forward, folding his hands. "Something's happened. My son and his wife have decided I'm too inconvenient to deal with. They've been researching nursing homes behind my back, preparing to dump me like an outdated appliance. If it weren't for Harla warning me, I might already be there." A shadow passed over his face. "He had a daughter," I remembered. "Same age as Kurt." "I see. I want to ensure that neither Kurt nor Dina can touch a dime unless I say so. I want Harla protected. Set up something for when she's older, 25 or 30. But until then, I want her safeguarded." He reached for a yellow legal pad. "All right, trust for Harla. Oversight under your control while she's a minor?" "No," I said. "If anything happens to me before she's grown, I want my niece Rachel to take over. She's in upstate New York. Good woman. Doesn't know any of this yet, but she's the only one I trust with that girl's future." James nodded and began scribbling. "And the house," I continued. "They've been circling like vultures. Property values are up and they know I've got no mortgage. I want the deed transferred into a holding trust. Make it legally untouchable." "That can be arranged," he said. "We can record the transfer as early as next week." I sat back, feeling the smallest flicker of control return to my chest. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. "There's something else," I said. He looked up. "I want to buy a property quietly, as close to their home as possible. Do you still work with discreet agents?" He arched an eyebrow. "You're serious?" Deadly. James reached for his Rolodex, he still used one, and plucked out a card. Call Helen Merrick. She's handled off market deals for some of my more private clients. Tell her I sent you. I stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. I want to meet with a private investigator. He blinked. Marie, not to follow them, to find out everything. I want to know their debts, their spending habits, their routines, who they talk to, what they've said about me. I want a report with receipts. He studied me carefully. You've changed. No, I said, pulling my coat around me. I've just stopped pretending I didn't see the cracks. I've been quiet too long. They took my silence for surrender. James leaned back, looking almost impressed. I'll make the calls. Outside, the wind was sharper than before. I walked to the corner and stood still while traffic passed. I could feel the pieces sliding into place, the legal walls rising, the paper trail tightening. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. The difference was everything. That afternoon, I met with Helen Merrick in a discreet office above a real estate agency. I told her exactly what I needed: a modest house, walking distance from Kurt and Dina's, something not flashy, but structurally sound, close enough to keep Harla in my life without needing anyone's permission. She pulled up 3 listings. The second one stopped me cold. A white clapboard colonial on Willow Lane, 1 street over from my son's. 2 stories, wraparound porch, privacy hedges, listed under market due to the owner's job relocation. How soon can we close? Helen smiled. Cash? We could do it in 10 days. Make the offer, I said. By the time I returned to my hotel room, the wheels were in motion. Trusts, transfers, titles, and truth. My heart was tired, but my mind was clear. They thought I'd go quietly. They thought I'd be easy to erase. They forgot who I used to be and who I still was underneath the cardigan and the quiet. The next morning, I met my private investigator in the back booth of a diner on the edge of town. Her name was Cassandra Bell, and she looked nothing like what I expected. Late 50s, gray streaked hair pulled into a neat ponytail, dark eyes that missed nothing. She wore jeans, a blazer, and no makeup, like she didn't have time for appearances, which was fine by me. I need eyes, I told her, sliding a folded paper across the Formica table. And ears, every corner of their life. The finances, the behavior, the lies, especially the ones involving my granddaughter. She unfolded the sheet slowly. Names, addresses, a few notes I'd jotted down in Peter's notebook margins, and nodded as she scanned. How deep? She asked. All the way to bedrock. Cassandra didn't flinch. How soon do you need it? I'm buying a house next door to them. I want everything before the closing date, and I want it documented, not gossip. Evidence. She leaned back. It'll cost. I opened my purse and placed a cashier's check on the table. She glanced at the amount and tucked it away without a word. I'll be in touch within the week, she said, then added with a faint smirk. They won't know I was ever there. And she meant it. The following days were a blur of logistics. James had already set up the holding trust for my house, and the property on Willow Lane was moving through escrow with startling efficiency. The legal documents for Harla's trust were nearly finished. $5 million locked up tight until her 30th birthday, with conditions set in stone. No early access, no interference from Kurt or Dina, and full control shifting to her once she reached adulthood. Rachel, my niece, agreed without hesitation to be named as successor guardian if anything happened to me. I didn't tell her everything, not yet, but enough to make her understand that Harla might need her one day. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, didn't go home. Let the answering machine fill with voicemails. The first few were casual. Kurt's voice trying to sound normal, saying they hoped I was okay, asking if I'd gone to the store. Then Dina chimed in, the practiced sweetness in her tone barely concealing the tension. By day 4, the messages turned sharp. Mom, you can't just disappear. We're worried sick. If something's wrong, we can help. But you need to be reasonable about your living situation. That word again, reasonable. And then came Harla's voice, small, uncertain, left on the machine after Dina must have stepped out of the room. Grandma, are you okay? Mommy says you're tired and needed a rest. I miss you. I made you a picture. Please come back soon. It broke something inside me, not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't know. They were feeding her lies, rewriting the story while I was gone. I called Cassandra that evening. Tell me what you've got. She didn't hesitate. Your son and daughter in law are in financial hell. Multiple maxed out credit cards, 2 car leases they can't afford, and a second mortgage on their house. I sat down slowly at the edge of the motel bed. Why the second mortgage? Looks like they've been using the house as a cash register, consolidated some personal loans, covered Dina's boutique credit lines, a few lavish vacations, a luxury fridge. You name it. I laughed bitterly, and I'm the burden. Worse, she said. Dina's been laying groundwork. She's been telling friends and neighbors you're slipping, forgetting names, misplacing things, playing the concerned daughter in law act, building a case. I felt my pulse spike. Building a case for what? She's consulted with a conservatorship attorney. She's asking about how to prove mental incompetency, specifically in the context of real estate assets. The motel room suddenly felt too warm. She wants to have me declared legally unfit, I whispered. She's already started drafting the documentation. A few friends lined up to confirm changes in behavior. She's smart, I'll give her that. If you hadn't left when you did, she might have pulled it off. My throat was dry. What about Harla? She's neglected. Not abused, but ignored. Walks herself to school. Often eats at the neighbor's house because no one's home when school ends. Your granddaughter is raising herself. A long silence passed between us. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Can you prove it? Cassandra's voice was cool and steady. I already have. I've got timestamps, surveillance, receipts, even a few witness statements. I'll bring everything to you in the morning. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall for a long time. So that was their plan. Institutionalize me to unlock the house equity, use Harla as a prop for family stability, repackage me as a confused, lonely old woman who'd lost her grip and push me out of the way before I got wise. But I was already wise. I'd been wise the entire time. They'd tried to make me invisible, replace truth with convenience, rewrite the narrative. But they didn't know what I'd built with Peter. They didn't know about the trust, the holdings, the protections, and they didn't know I had Cassandra. They thought they were tightening a noose, but I was building a trap. One legal filing, one surveillance photo, one notarized document at a time. And when the moment came, I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't even flinch. I'd simply hand them the truth and let it do the damage. The key turned easily in the lock. The front door creaked open into a sunlit hallway that smelled faintly of lavender and old paint. I stood on the threshold for a long moment, absorbing the quiet, the air, the sheer weight of the decision I'd just made. I owned this house now, 247 Willow Lane. 2 stories, a wide wraparound porch, blue shutters that could use a fresh coat of paint, and a back fence that lined up perfectly with the corner of my son's property. From the upstairs bedroom window, I could already see Harla's swing set peeking through the gaps in the hedge. It was done, closed, paid in full, no mortgage, no loans. Just a wire transfer and a handful of signatures, and suddenly I was the newest resident of the street I used to walk as a young mother holding Kurt's hand. I'd brought nothing with me but a small suitcase and Peter's green ledger. Everything else could wait. The house was quiet, but not empty. It had stories. The previous owners had left behind a few things: a rocking chair on the porch, an old spice rack in the kitchen, a faded welcome mat that felt too ironic to throw out. I ran my hand over the banister, tracing the grain of the wood. It felt steady, solid. Unlike the people next door, Kurt and Dina had no idea yet. They were still calling my house phone, still checking my front door, still pretending to be concerned. I let the messages pile up. I listened to each one, but I never returned the calls. The most recent was from Dina, and her voice was sugar-laced steel. Marie, we're just trying to help. If you're struggling, you don't have to go through it alone. We've found some excellent facilities, very dignified. You'd have community, care, safety. Safety. As if I were some kind of fragile artifact they were afraid to crack. As if their real concern wasn't about safety at all, but about time, how long they'd have to keep smiling before they could sell off my life and label it mercy. I opened the kitchen window and looked out across the fence. Their yard was visible from here, trimmed hedges, stone patio, glass sliding doors leading into their living room. I could see shadows moving inside. Dina, pacing. Kurt, sitting at the dining table, shoulders hunched, elbows on his knees. It didn't take a mind reader to know what they were talking about, where I'd gone, what I might know, how to control the fallout. Too late. I stood in my new kitchen, letting the sunlight hit my face. I hadn't felt this level of control in years. For so long, I'd lived like I was already halfway gone, dimmed my presence, clipped my opinions, made myself small to avoid tension. Now I had no reason to hide. No more pretending to be powerless. I walked upstairs and opened the bedroom door that faced their house. It was a sweet little room, cream-colored walls, hardwood floors, a built-in window seat that overlooked the neighborhood. I sat on the cushion and looked through the sheer curtain. Harla's light was on. She was at her desk, head bent over a drawing. Her little feet kicked rhythmically under the chair. She didn't know I was there, just 50 feet away, in a room of my own, watching over her like I always had. And now, she never had to go a day without me unless her parents chose to make it so. And if they did, I had paperwork, attorneys, and more than enough means to remind them what loss really looked like. The phone in my pocket buzzed. A text from Kurt. Mom, please, call us. Harla is asking for you every night. We're worried. We miss you. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. They didn't miss me. They missed my compliance, my utility, my silence. They'd get none of that anymore. I stood and opened the window, just a crack, letting in the warm breeze. In a few days, I'd have the movers bring my things. I'd plant a garden in the backyard, maybe some herbs in the windowsill. I'd bake again, sleep without checking locks twice. And when Harla came home from school, I'd be here. Not behind a gate, not on visiting hours, not locked in someone else's version of safe. Here, next door, watching, waiting, holding every card. 3 days after I stepped into the house on Willow Lane, I sat in James Moreland's office once again. This time, I wasn't asking for help. I was issuing commands. I want everything locked, not just protected, impenetrable. They've already laid the foundation for a conservatorship case, and they'll try to strike again when they realize I'm not cooperating. James nodded, flipping through the updated binder of documents he'd prepared. They'll be in for a surprise. With this setup, they won't be able to touch a thing without your consent or a court order, and even then, it would be a nightmare for them to try. Good, I said, voice calm but steel-threaded. That's exactly what I want. He slid over the new will first. Its cover sheet was marked private, to be filed only if necessary. I opened it slowly, scanning the language we'd carefully drafted. My estate, worth nearly $19 million now with new patent royalties rolling in, would bypass Kurt entirely unless a very specific condition was met. The language was crystal clear. Beneficiary status for my son, Kurt Calloway, is contingent upon a legally documented and independently verified demonstration of sustained parental responsibility, emotional maturity, and financial independence over a period of no less than 5 consecutive years. Harla gets everything? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. James nodded. In the event Kurt fails to meet the conditions, the estate transfers to your granddaughter when she turns 30, with oversight by your niece Rachel until then. And the trust fund for Harla? Solid as bedrock. $5 million completely out of their reach. It's tied to an educational clause but can be used for housing, health, travel, and personal development. Rachel will serve as trustee if you pass before Harla's 18th birthday. Otherwise, it's yours to manage. I exhaled slowly. It felt like exhaling 5 years of fear, 5 years of swallowing every slight, every cold smile from Dina, every look of silent disappointment from Kurt. What about my health directives? He slid over the next document. This is your medical power of attorney. It states in no uncertain terms that no one, not Kurt, not Dina, not any hospital administrator can make medical decisions for you without your written and witnessed consent. Period. I signed it without hesitation. The pen glided across the paper like a blade through silk. There's one more thing, James said, reaching into his bottom drawer. You asked for a statement, something that could be distributed publicly if needed. An insurance policy of sorts. He handed me a sealed envelope. On the front, in his clean legal print, to be opened only in the event of emergency litigation or a court-appointed petition for conservatorship. Inside was a notarized statement, written in my own words, explaining the entire history of the deception. The voicemail transcriptions, Cassandra's documented evidence, Dina's lawyer consultation, my secret exit, my financial situation, the full picture. If they tried to paint me as unstable, this would torch their argument like dry leaves under a magnifying glass. I placed the envelope in my purse. Thank you, James, I said. You've done more than you know. I've worked with families a long time, Marie, he said gently, but I've never seen someone take back their narrative quite like this. I didn't take it back, I replied. I finally stopped giving it away. That afternoon, I returned to 247 Willow Lane and unpacked the first of my boxes. The rocking chair went on the porch. The photograph of Peter, young, laughing, holding a wrench in one hand and a blueprint in the other, went on the mantel. I pulled out the yellowing recipe cards he used to mock but secretly loved. One by one, I brought the pieces of my real life into the light. As the sun began to dip, I heard it. Laughter. Harla's, unmistakable, drifting over the fence like music. I stepped outside and peered through the hedge. She was in the backyard next door, spinning in slow circles, arms flung out wide. Dina was on her phone, not watching. Kurt wasn't in sight. I called softly. Harla? She stopped mid-spin and whipped around. Her eyes widened. Grandma? I smiled. Come see my new house. Within seconds, she was squeezing through the gap in the hedge and flinging herself into my arms. You're here? Right next door? Mommy said you were in a hospital. I held her tight. No, sweetheart. I'm perfectly fine. I just needed a little time to think, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I lived close enough to see you every day? She looked up at me with a grin that held zero suspicion, just joy. Can I see inside? Of course, I said. I made her cocoa in the new kitchen and let her sit cross-legged on the counter while I told her about the garden I planned to plant, the cookies we'd bake, the bird feeder Peter once made that I was going to hang on the porch. She giggled at every idea, already planning what color flowers we'd plant first. Later, after I walked her back through the hedge, I saw Dina watching from the window. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, but she saw me, and that was enough for now. She would realize soon enough that I wasn't there as a neighbor. I was there as a wall she couldn't scale, silence, or manipulate. Everything I owned, my finances, my home, my story was now shielded in legal steel. I'd built a fortress with Peter's patience and my own rage, and from here on out, I was the one writing the rules. I didn't call ahead. I didn't give them a heads up, a warning, or a courtesy knock. I walked straight across the yard the next Saturday afternoon, stepped onto their polished stone patio, and rang the bell like I was returning a borrowed casserole dish. Dina answered, barefoot and startled, dressed in athleisure like she'd just finished pretending to exercise. The smile she tried to muster died halfway across her lips. Marie, she said, her voice pinched. You shouldn't just show up unannounced. Is Kurt home? She blinked, then turned slightly. He's upstairs. Get him. Dina hesitated. I didn't break eye contact. She turned on her heel and disappeared down the hall, her footsteps clipped and sharp. I waited in the doorway, not inside. Not yet. This was my scene to control, not theirs. Kurt appeared 30 seconds later. He looked thinner, like guilt had been gnawing at him in my absence. His expression flickered between relief and apprehension. Mom, he said, stepping forward, arms slightly out. You're okay. I stepped past him, straight into the living room. I'm here to talk, I said. And you're both going to listen. Dina moved to speak, but I held up a small voice recorder and placed it squarely on the coffee table. This is being recorded. For my own protection. Kurt glanced at it like it might explode. Mom, that's not necessary. Isn't it? I asked, calmly taking the armchair facing them. Because from where I'm sitting, the two of you have been busy plotting my disappearance. Dina folded her arms. You left without telling anyone. We were worried. You were relieved, I said flatly. You thought you'd finally broken me down, made me pliable, gotten me to slink off into the shadows. That's ridiculous, she started, but I cut her off. Let's review, shall we? You've been researching nursing homes for months, starting right after you realized what my house was worth. You consulted a conservatorship attorney behind my back. You've been telling neighbors I'm slipping, manipulating Harla into believing I was ill. You started setting the stage so you could take legal control of my assets while appearing like the loving, concerned family. Kurt's mouth opened, then closed. I reached into my purse and slid a thick folder onto the table beside the recorder. This is a report compiled by Cassandra Bell, a licensed investigator. Financial records, photos, transcripts of calls, witness accounts, every ugly detail. Dina's face drained of color. I didn't. Oh, you did, I snapped. You left a trail, you always do. That conservatorship lawyer, his secretary's cousin, is married to Cassandra's brother. Small world, isn't it? Dina looked like she might throw up. Kurt rubbed a hand over his jaw, stunned into silence. But that's not all, I continued, now removing a manila envelope and opening it. Here's what you didn't know. I pulled out the first bank statement and held it up. My current net worth is just shy of $19 million. Kurt recoiled. What? I laid out the next document. Peter's patents? Still earning. Investments? Still growing. For 5 years, I let you believe I was scraping by. Why? Because your father wanted to see what kind of man his son would become without a safety net. Kurt sat slowly, blinking as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. 5 million of it is already in an irrevocable trust for Harla. You can't touch it. You can't even sneeze near it without setting off legal alarms. Dina let out a strangled sound. You can't do that. I already have. I leaned forward. And I've redrafted my will. You, Kurt, receive nothing unless you prove yourself over a 5-year period of financial responsibility, emotional maturity, and demonstrated parental care. Kurt looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 minutes. Dina was trembling now, lips parted, hands clenched in her lap. You plan to institutionalize me, I said. To steal my home, to lie to my granddaughter, to erase me from your lives like a stain on the rug. And you would have succeeded if I'd been the woman you thought I was. Mom, Kurt's voice cracked. It wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was like, I said. Because I have the documents, the dates, the attorney's name. Tell me how you justify plotting to put me away like some decrepit liability when I'm healthy, competent, and 2 steps ahead of both of you. Dina buried her face in her hands. Kurt finally looked me in the eyes. We didn't know what to do. We were drowning. The debt, the house, the stress, it just kept piling up. And we thought maybe the house could save you? I asked. He nodded, ashamed. You were willing to destroy me to save yourselves. That's not stress, Kurt. That's cowardice. He flinched. I stood. I've moved into the house next door permanently. I'll see Harla whenever I please. And if either of you tries to interfere, I have a legal team on standby who would be delighted to drag this entire mess into open court. Dina looked up. Her voice was small. What do you want from us? Nothing, I said. That's the point. I don't want apologies, and I don't want explanations. I want distance. And I want Harla to know that she has one adult in her life who doesn't lie to her. Kurt stood, tears welling in his eyes. She loves you. So do I. I just got lost. I looked at him for a long time. The boy he'd been still flickered beneath the man he'd become. That's your burden to fix, not mine. I picked up my recorder, my documents, and my dignity. At the door, I turned.
If you want to change for her, then change, but don't do it to win me back. Do it because you're finally ready to be the man your father hoped you'd become. Then I walked out, down the stone path, across the lawn, and back into the house I had chosen. Not the one they tried to take from me, the one I bought with my own money, my own name, and my own legacy. And from the window, I saw Harla's light flick on upstairs. She didn't know yet, but soon she would.
The morning after the confrontation, I woke to birdsong instead of phone calls. No voicemails, no fake apologies, just the quiet rustling of maple leaves outside my window and the sunlight crawling softly across the hardwood floor of my new bedroom. I made tea. Real tea, not the microwaved kind I'd settled for in the motel. The steam curled upward as I stood by the kitchen window, looking into the yard I now called mine. It still felt unreal that I'd pulled it off, that they hadn't seen me coming until I was already inside the walls. From the back porch, I could see the top edge of Harla's red backpack bobbing past the hedge as she walked towards school, alone, again. No sign of Dina or Kurt. Just a 7-year-old carrying her own lunch, her own books, her own weight. That wouldn't last much longer. I'd already spoken to James about seeking visitation rights, formal, written into court orders if necessary, but I wanted to give them time first to see what, if anything, might grow in the crater I'd left behind. By the end of the week, Harla knocked on my door for the first time. "I saw you in the garden," she said. "Mommy says you're tired, but I don't think you are. You look regular." I laughed. "I feel regular. Want to help me plant carrots?" She beamed, and within minutes we were both kneeling in the dirt behind the porch, her little fingers poking neat rows of seeds into the dark soil. I told her stories about Peter, how he'd once flooded the backyard with a sprinkler prototype that failed spectacularly. She giggled and wiped soil on her jeans. It was the first real sound of happiness I'd heard in days. Later that afternoon, I walked her home through the side gate, our hands still a little muddy. Dina opened the door, looking unsure of what to say. Her usual edge was dulled. Her eyes were shadowed. "She was just helping me in the garden," I said calmly. "I hope that's all right." Dina hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Thank you." She closed the door without another word. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. In the following weeks, small shifts began to show. Kurt stopped avoiding me. He came over one Saturday morning, holding a basket of muffins he clearly didn't bake himself, and asked if I'd like to talk. We sat on the porch. He didn't offer excuses, just a slow, broken admission that he'd lost sight of what mattered, that he'd let Dina make too many decisions, that he hadn't been the father he wanted to be. I listened. I didn't absolve him, but I listened. "I saw the trust paperwork," he said quietly. "The copy you left on my desk, $5 million for Harla. It's not for show," I replied. "It's for her, and you don't get a say in it. But you can earn something more valuable if you try." "What's that?" "Her respect." He nodded. "I want to. I don't know how yet, but I do." Dina didn't say much, but I noticed changes. She began walking Harla to school. She started spending afternoons on the front porch instead of glued to her phone inside. Once, I caught her pulling weeds in their garden, wearing Kurt's old flannel and no makeup. She didn't see me watching, and I didn't interrupt. I just filed it away as another unexpected shift. Meanwhile, Harla bloomed. She came over after school most days. We baked, we sewed, we painted clay flower pots for the porch. She told me about her classmates, her favorite book, her plan to become a zookeeper or a piano player, whichever came first. She laughed more, ate better, slept sounder. She was safe. That was all I ever wanted. One evening, she tugged on my sleeve and asked, "Grandma, do you think people can change? Like really change?" I looked down at her. "Sometimes," I said, "but not because someone else wants them to. They have to want it themselves, and they have to work for it." She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Daddy's trying." "I know," I said. "So is Mommy." "I'm glad you live next door now," she whispered. "It feels Safer. I squeezed her hand. Me too, sweetheart, me too. That night, I sat on my porch long after she'd gone inside. The street was quiet. The porch light buzzed faintly above me. Somewhere, wind chimes clinked in the breeze. I stared out into the dark, listening, waiting. It wasn't over, not yet. People don't change overnight, and trust doesn't rebuild itself in silence. But roots were taking hold, roots I'd planted carefully, painfully, deliberately, not out of vengeance anymore, but for legacy, for the little girl who saw through all the lies, and for the woman I'd become when I finally stopped letting people decide who I was supposed to be. It happened on a Tuesday morning, just as the first chill of autumn began to bite the air. I was in the garden, clipping the last of the marigolds, when I heard the gate creak open. I looked up, expecting Harla. It was Dina. No makeup, no sunglasses, no designer tote, just jeans, a plain sweater, and eyes that had finally run out of clever things to say. Her arms were crossed, but not in defiance, more like she was holding herself together. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "Good," I replied, standing and brushing soil off my gloves. "I was wondering if I could talk to you alone." I said nothing for a long moment, then gestured to the porch. We sat in the wicker chairs Peter had once revarnished, the silence between us stretching as far as the hedge line. "I've never apologized to anyone properly," Dina said, eyes on her knees. "Not because I didn't think I was wrong, but because I thought admitting it made me weak." I waited. "I justified everything," she continued. "Told myself I was protecting Kurt, protecting our future. I framed it like we were helping you, giving you safety. But it wasn't about you at all. It was about money, fear, and control." I raised an eyebrow. "And what changed?" Her voice cracked. "Harla." She looked up at me then, eyes glassy. "She comes home talking about the cookies you made, the stories you tell, the vegetables you're growing together. She smiles more now than I've seen her smile in years. And the other night, she told me she hopes she grows up to be wise like Grandma, not just fancy like Mommy." Dina let out a shaky laugh. That one cut deep. "She's a perceptive girl," I said. "She is," Dina nodded. And I realized I've been poisoning her without even realizing it. The way I talk about people, the way I avoid hard feelings by buying my way out, the way I look at you. There was a long pause. "I hated that you were always there," she admitted. "Always close to Kurt. Always making me feel like an outsider in my own family. I thought if I could remove you, everything would settle." "And did it?" "No," she whispered. "It made everything worse." For a moment, she didn't look like the polished woman who walked through life on heels and half lies. She looked like a girl who'd gotten lost in her own reflection. And though part of me wanted to stay cold, to protect the walls I'd spent months building, another part remembered that she was human, too, deeply flawed, yes, but not unreachable. "What do you want from me?" I asked finally. "Nothing," she said. I needed to tell you that I see it now, what I did, who I was, and that I'm trying to change. Not for Kurt, not even for Harla, for me." I studied her face. There was no performative guilt, no tears she hoped would soften me, just exhaustion and sincerity. "I'm not promising we'll be friends," I said. "I wouldn't expect that. But if I see you putting in the work, for your daughter, for yourself, I won't stand in the way." Dina nodded, slow and deliberate. "And if I see the old you trying to come back," I added, "I won't be quiet again." "You won't have to be," she said. She stood to leave, but paused at the top of the stairs. "Marie?" "Yes?" "Thank you for protecting Harla. Even from me." She walked back through the gate, leaving me alone with the marigolds. I sat there for a while after she left, unsure how to feel. The victory I'd fought for had already been won. The legal protections, the house, the trust fund, the control. But this This quiet moment of reckoning felt like the most fragile piece of the whole mosaic. Maybe she wouldn't follow through. Maybe she would. That wasn't my burden anymore. But for Harla's sake, I hoped she would. Now I'm curious about you. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever gone through something like this? Let me know in the comments. And while you're here, I've left 2 of my other stories on screen. I promise they'll surprise you. Thanks for watching all the way to the end.